So what is special education? Today in the 21st century, we know special education as a program that encompasses children with learning disabilities, with physical disabilities, mental disabilities, whatever that might be, and provides them with a specialized, specified learning environment. One thing that we want to know about when we talk about special education is, what is special education? What defines those boundaries? So one of the things that we want to look at is that kind of broad overview and that definition. So according to the Council for the Exceptional Child, special education is defined as learning for a child who has unusual or atypical needs. And so that's really a broad definition. And what that can come down to is a parent, a child, and a school district really identifying, yes, this child has needs, yes, this child needs to be on a specialized track with specialized help to really learn and to really understand what they're going to be given, the assignments, the work, and that kind of a thing. The next thing that we want to look at is the kind of the evolution of special education. So what we want to talk about then is kind of how this came to be. So first, in 1893, we have the very first case of special education really coming into play. And that was when a Massachusetts Supreme Court case denied a child who, by today's standards, would be a special needs child. He was denied an education because of his poor academic ability. And so what that case went to the Supreme Court, and what that Supreme Court decided was to uphold the definitions and the decisions of that school. And so that was kind of the beginning, but it didn't really, special education didn't really receive its, so to speak, kick in the rear until the Brown v. Board of Education in the 1900s. And that was about 60 years later. So we have this 60-year gap of nothing happening, and this idea of if you are not able to sit in a classroom and learn, you are stupid and you don't belong, and there's not a place for you. So what we want to come in and focus on with this Brown v. Board of Education is what it ends up stating is that every person has the right to education. There's an equal right, it's an undeniable right, and it is not based off of gender, race, identity, or disability. And that last part is really what we're going to focus on. Years later, we come in the 70s, 1970s, with the establishment of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, known as the ESEA. And what this does is this really sets guidelines and says that there is an allocation of federal money for publicized and privatized education. So when we think about that, we think about private schools and we think about public schools, but we don't necessarily always think about what that means in terms of special education. And so 2 years later, Gerald Ford signs into action IDEA, or Individuals with Disabilities Act. And what this comes basically to say was the realization of half of the 8 million children who were being placed in a special education institution were not receiving the quality of education and then the quality of care that they really needed to be prospering. And so this idea, the Individualized Education Program, known as IEP, really sets guidelines for these kids. And what they do is they say not every child is the same. Not every child with Down syndrome is the same. You may have a child in special ed who has Down syndrome. You may have somebody with cerebral palsy, and then you may have an outlier, or what seems to be an outlier, as someone with dyslexia, let's say. And so what the IEP does is it basically states that each child does meet one of these 13 categories for special education. And so those lie in with autism, blindness, deafness, speech and language impairment, learning disabilities, traumatic brain injuries, and that list is just a very expansive group. So the thing that we want to focus on then is after we really look at all of that, is we want to kind of figure out why does this matter? And so the other thing that we want to really talk about is the Rehabilitation Act. And that really set out guidelines for special education and stated, you really need to be up to par where we are. With IDEA, those guidelines were set in 1975, but it wasn't until 2006 that there was really a specified level of where special education and education needed to be, and that they were placed on that same level. So those loopholes kind of stayed in place for several years, and what that kind of ended up doing for education and for special needs kids was that there was this gap in their learning and in their treatment and all that kind of a thing. And so that led to the creation of vouchers. And what vouchers are is basically a way for parents to send their child to a privatized or a specialized institution. Here in Tulsa, that would be something like the Little Lighthouse. In Oklahoma City, it's a place called Special Care. And what we can look at from that is basically what happens is whatever school district the parent is living in, if they win their court case and they go to the appeals court, basically what happens is that school district pays for their child to receive an education at this specialized or privatized institution. Most likely they go hand in hand, usually. So the thing that we want to really talk about when we look at that is that these vouchers allow a freer education. So there's proponents and there's opponents to this idea, but what it really still ends up coming back to is this basic idea of everyone has the right to have an education. Every child, no matter their disability or their differences, is allowed to have a fair and equal education. They are not confined to rules or other standards that some kids are if they have been identified as special needs. And so really what we want to conclude with is this idea of the special education was this totally disambiguous issue. 150 years ago, the idea didn't even exist. But now what we can see is this multifaceted issue with equality, with college coming up. Where does a special ed child go to college? And there's a lot of different branches of education and information that you can really gather from learning about special education. Thank you.